A pleasure to meet all at last, and here, once again, I am proud to talk about a couple of things that are relative to Nerf here in Super Foam Flying. But now, what we're going to do is we are going to be getting into, some more of this. Basically, this is one of the very few instances I've ever seen a Nerf blaster boxed up like this. You call this a box? I mean, it's just more than a cardboard wrap. You might as well be having a piece of fruit with, I guess, a zip tie around it to indicate that it's packaged up and ready to be shipped to the grocery store. But anyways, this is a pretty strange case in terms of boxing, but I can probably tell right off the bat that this blaster actually could be pretty decent. Considering its small price tag, and with its size being on par with blasters like the Rough Cut, Achilles, and we also can't forget about such blasters like this Vortex Vigilon VTX blaster, which I've given a whole different name. But let's not get into that subject right now, because it might eventually get me off track. Let's just get Frost into the action. My very reliable cutter. And let's get the Tetrad QS4 up and out of its packaging. Just like so. And with that, should be all ready to go. So I got the blaster itself out. Now for 4 included elite darts, which are apparently not wrapped in any kind of plastic at all. They're just settled inside a cardboard box within the box itself. As much of a box as it's supposed to be, but in any case, here we go. It comes with 4 darts, rightfully so. Because with 4 barrels inside, that's just pretty much what you need. And wow, you know what? This definitely feels a lot different than I would have anticipated. It definitely is kind of a size. It's not really made for my type. I got the more thicker ends when it comes to body frames. And I feel like that some other people might be a lot different than this. So maybe their take on this blaster in terms of its size in proportion to their own bodies might be a bit different. But the way I see it, it just seems a bit too small. I mean, blasters that happen to be more appropriately sized would be like the rival Poseidon or the Hyper Mach, for instance. And of course, you know, there are other blasters from the Super line, well, Elite 2.0. Do we really need to get into that debate anymore? But anyways, plenty of other blasters from this line actually fit me so much better than this. So you know what? The size being too small, that might be one con that I have for this. Otherwise, what else can I say? Well, grip is also pretty small. Draw is also pretty nice, but not necessarily as solid as I would have hoped for. Also, I can't help but the sort of sound that happens from the plastic rubbing together like that during the draw. If you can hear it pretty much. I'm starting to get goosebumps from this even. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the texture of both of these things. And of course, you know, when texture, the grip itself, I do kind of like that sort of pattern, but it doesn't really aid to much grip because, yeah, it's just not necessarily as well studded as it probably should be in order to help aid grip. And again, the small nature of this blaster, the more shrunken down piece of this, I guess with all that put together, it almost makes me feel like that I'm actually growing into a giant. Do we really want that to be apparent? Probably not. Anyways though, 1 tack rail on here, another positive I can at least stress. Then we get, well, draw, which is self-explanatory enough. And how about performance and whatnot? Well, pretty solid, I guess. For a blaster like this, seems just about right. But again, for this to have this weird shrunken down feel to it, and also with the fact that the stock itself isn't really adjustable, and on top of all that, this is yet another one of those cases of a blaster that happens to have screws all over it. which could potentially allow for somebody to be able to take it apart and mod it by any means. But with the blasters all being fused together to prevent modification, I felt like there was a more solid feel to it. With all this extra hardware I now got to deal with, I can't really be sure of it or how to put it into words. But the Tetrad QS4, just being a QS4 blaster, but with a whole different construction to it. Has an included stock on it, has a much larger frame, and a pump grip on the bottom, like so. But with this supposed shrunken down feel to it, I almost feel like that with me being 10 years old, a lot smaller in size, I probably would have been able to handle this blaster with ease, but it just feels really small in my hands. Compared to a good bunch of other blasters that happen to be rightfully proportioned for my stature and also for the kind of blaster feel that I'm typically expecting from blasters like this. And being that there were plenty of blasters from this line, it makes me wonder why another blaster from this line happens to actually be smaller in size. Not necessarily relative to other blasters, like the Ace right here. Because even with the Ace, for example, man, yeah, doesn't really feel small, but holding it a certain way seems to really aid in some ways. So I feel like maybe if I try, yeah, looks like I can technically work around it, but this is more of a band-aid remark that I happen to be giving out. Wow, did not see that coming. Okay, trigger's also a little bit sensitive too, so that could be a problem. Let's, yeah, barely tapping on it, and it's apparently enough to release the dart out into the wild. So I guess the way I see it, the Tetrad QS4, pretty good on some ends. Has itself a nice tack rail over here, a nice lightweight feel which can be easy to handle. The capacity for 4 darts, but with the addition of a tack rail on top, it can be resourceful enough to be able to find a way to work around this simple issue here. Because having only 4 darts can last so long out in the battlefield. But otherwise, there's a lot of cons to this one. It's debatably bad for the reasons of it being small in terms of its proportion to your own body, depending on your type. The draw also, while it seems a bit shallow and does have a decent resistance to it because of the kind of spring they use for this one, I feel like that, yeah, it just causes a little bit of goosebumps right there. Then also, something a little more obvious, the stock does not adjust. Probably what we could expect in other blasters from here on out. And there's also a bunch of screws here. If you wanted to deal with all this extra hardware in terms of trying to mod the blaster, maybe be my guest, but I tend to leave everything raw, unrefined, if you will. And so, with that in mind, this is my take on the Tetrad QS4. And some people might think differently about it, but my overall rating for this, at the very moment, to be specific, is going to be a 6.3 out of 10.1. Not necessarily that bad of a blaster, but not really going to be heartful enough to call it a great blaster. It might only be good in some specific ways. And so, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side if you'd like to see more.